through that real quick and then go over your assignment. But first one we're looking at, and your assignment goes with the notes. We have the notes right here. So make sure as we're going over this, you can be filling this in. It's a little out of order, but not too bad. And then you have assignment piece to do on the bottom that we're going to work on. This is for today and tomorrow. So we have first one on principles. So a reminder, the elements of design are all like the building blocks and what we're going to be doing with things. And then the principles of design are how do we actually put them all together. And so the first one I talk about is scale. This is, and scale and proportion get really easily confused, and they get so confusing. It's just after that, the other ones are much easier. But scale is how the size of an object in space relates to the size of other objects in the space or the whole space as itself. So meaning like I can say, oh, if I have a human being, I want to make the scale of the furniture fit that human being. Another example is like in this picture is how this space is really big and also those windows are really big. And so that island is to scale with the room and those windows. Like if I had this in half and I have a tiny island here, it wouldn't look to scale. It would just look odd. Because the room is so big and tall, and especially because the windows are big also. So that's why this is in the proper scale. If I look at some other examples, scale to the person. So like a child size, we have child size furniture, and it's scaled down to the child. The pictures on the right are showing like a normal scale would be like larger trees in a house with a human being. A really large scale looks a little odd because those trees are so much bigger, right? And they're usually not that much bigger. Like that's an odd scale. Unless you got like in redwood forest kind of stuff or things really tall. But in that case, if I was going to make this more properly scaled, I probably want to put a 2-story house, or at least something with a taller ceiling, something looking more vaulted in this way to make it look better. The small scale, you see the small scale all the time in new neighborhoods. So they plant new trees, and the neighborhoods don't look quite as nice as where they have more mature trees. So that's kind of where we're looking at scale. Proportion is different. Proportion, and you want to write the stuff that's in bold, I think is the most effective. But proportion is concerned more with the relationship between parts of an object, or like a whole thing of the object. So an example is going to be the lamp in relationship to the base, or relationship to the whole thing. And it's usually expressed in ratios, and the most effective one is usually 2 to 3. Sometimes it helps people, instead of doing like a fraction-y ratio, like 2 to 3, to think of it as percentages wise, and then you can break it down from there. So like this lamp in relationship to the base, like I could put this as a 2 to 3, like there's 2 sections in relationship, this would be like 3 sections. Or you can consider it like, oh, on here I have, like this is 30%, and maybe this is like 60%. However you want to break that out. So you can kind of see. So lamps are a good way to show that. This is also just showing bad proportion on this left-hand side and good proportion on the right-hand side. So this has, having it just split down the middle is not as pleasing because it's just boring, right? But having it, this is the opposite. This is the lack of harmony, as it's too varied on this bottom portion. So having it just so different in the split. Good proportion adds more interest by having it more in that like 1/3 and 2/3 area. Or if you look towards the bottom, if you want to split it in the middle, we don't just do one line. We put like an interesting piece, a section in there that takes it up, and then it's halfway on either side. And that can be good proportion too. And I think that for this thing, at that example of the lamp, if I have a lamp with a base and the shade are like exactly the same size and it's just split in the middle, it's not going to look as nice. But you will see a lot of lamps that the shade and the base of it are the same size. So when they do that, a lot of times like after the shade, and you keep going down, there's going to be maybe like a small narrow section that kind of looks like these little skinny sections on the bottom right one, and then the base gets wider, and then that's the other kind of mostly half of it, and that's how that works usually. And needs you to know, but just the golden section, this is basically like a, just kind of like the most pleasing if you're dividing something is somewhere in between that 1/2 and 1/3 of its total length. And how people tie back curtains is a good example of that. And it's not tying it back at that half or right on the third, it's somewhere in between. Recognizing proportion takes practice. Just kind of look around at different objects and kind of see. Remember, the proportion is like the object as a whole. And then this is, and I have this in your notes, is looking at what's the difference between scale and proportion, because it can get really confusing and sometimes they're used a little bit interchangeably. The scale is the relative size of one object to another object or to a person. And then proportion is the relative size of parts of a whole. So I think a face works really well for this. So like, is the mouth in proportion to the whole face? Are the ears in proportion to the face? Or the eyes and the nose? All of those pieces. And that's when we look at like a lamp, it's like we can say, okay, is the shade in proportion to the whole lamp? Is the face in proportion to the lamp? And that works. And it works for tons of other things too. That's just one of the easier ones to identify. Okay. There's also on here I have, it's an article, but I don't necessarily think, it's not necessarily for you to read the whole thing. I just want you to be able to see some of these pictures. And so looking at like lighting, how to scale down a space. So this is a huge space with lots of open space, really tall ceilings. So they're using like this light right here in particular to kind of scale it down. It's like bringing it down a little bit. Okay, so just making it feel a little more intimate is adding things in. This next one, I love this example, is layering rugs to get a proper proportion. So like this rug in relationship to the space in the floor is too small. Okay, so when we get rugs, we want the rugs to go like underneath the sofa, at least like halfway under the sofa usually. And then same thing, halfway under like this piece. And so it's going around much more. And this, because it would just look out of proportion and not as good. So how they're fixing that, because they want to use this rug, how they're fixing that is making it so they have another rug underneath it. So you can kind of see on the side a little bit that it's, let me move this over. You can kind of see that it's a wood floor. And then they have this nice rug that they want, but it's too little. So they fixed it with like a more plain rug. And they put that down first, and then they put the more interesting rug on top of it. And that makes it work. So you get a more casual layered look, and it's all in proportion. This one on here, this is looking at working in multiples. So just because a light appears too small in a room on its own, doesn't mean you have to rule it out. You can do multiple of them. So like in this one, and part of why this wouldn't be to scale is because the room is so big and it's so open. So having just one light wouldn't work. If this was a closed off room, the one light might be fine. But because it's so open and big, they use different ones in different sizes, and that makes it more to scale to the room itself. And then also notice on here it has 3. Odd numbers are almost always more pleasing than even. Again, always exceptions to the rule, but putting 2 of these lights here would look really odd. You kind of want the 1 or the 3 on there usually. So that's just showing some examples. If you want to, you can click on the link and learn more, but I just want to show you a few ones that are kind of important. Okay, and then hopping back, the next ones are so much easier. We're going to talk about rhythm. This creates different effects with lines, colors, forms, textures. So it's taking all your elements and it's what are you going to do with those elements. There's 5 different types. We're going to go over the 5, but I only have 3 that I want you to focus on. This first one that you're focusing on is repetition. So it's just repeating something. A color, a pattern, a line, texture, any of those things. You can see in this picture, they're repeating the blue. They're repeating the different striped pattern in here. They're repeating like the different lines in the beams. Seeing kind of the lines in the windows, but adding some of the circular things. So there's different circular things being repeated. So lots of different stuff in that. Okay, radiation is when lines radiate or move outward from a central point. So examples of this would be like a round table and chairs, small pictures grouped in one little thing. Another one, this one is, you'll see, I wish I could zoom in a little bit more here, but it's like a vase, and then there's branches that are set in it, and it radiates out with those branches. Clocks are a perfect example of radiation. Like a sunburst, starburst pattern does as well. Gradation is a succession of size of an object from large to small or from dark to light. Ombre is a perfect example of gradation. When we look at this one, this is doing a repeating pattern, but I'm starting here, I have light, a little darker, and a little darker. Nesting tables are a great example of this. You can see I can push them all underneath, but they're kind of small, medium, and large. Anytime you have like a small, medium, large thing, that's gradation too. I think of like the Russian nesting dolls. You can even do it with accessories. Like if I have a vase, a small, medium, large vase, that works too. Artwork, same thing. And I have opposition and contrast. I don't have this as one of them when you're practicing. It's really easy, but it's just putting elements directly in opposition to one another. So I have like circles and squares that would be together. Or I could have just doing a complementary color scheme does this automatically, like a red and green are opposite. I can also do white or black, which is what this picture is showing. Okay, transition is another one, but you don't need to focus on this one. But it's a way, it's like using curved lines to carry your eye kind of across a more straight surface. So it's kind of like a pattern, swag pattern with no treatments, kind of a slow line across it. The curved windows along with the curved sofa in here do that as well. Then we're going to talk about balance. It kind of gives us a sense of equilibrium of everything like works in a room. And it's when the amount, size, or weights of objects on both sides of a point are equal or appear to be equal. And we think about visual weight and attention, not actual weight of objects when we're doing this. And there's two types. So first we have symmetrical balance, is identical objects are arranged similarly on each side of an imaginary line. So like I cut these rooms in half, you can see it looks exactly the same or almost exactly the same on either side. Like on the left-hand picture, the actual artwork is a little different, but the frames and the mat and all of that is the same. I think in the middle one, they're identical, other than this white. I think that's a little glitch, actually. They were identical. I don't know how that got on there. And then this left-hand side one is identical other than the hat. And the hat is just thrown in for some interest because symmetrical balance is formal. It's very calm and relaxing, but it can get a little boring. Depends on the look that you're going for and what else you're doing in the space. Like this middle one, I would not call that boring because there's so much going on otherwise with color. Asymmetrical is the next one. This is where the same imaginary line, but they're in balance with each other, but they're not identical. So this one on the right-hand side, I have like this statue on the one side, and then over here, which is tall, but then on the other side, I have something that's shorter, but it's wider. And then what balances out even better is on the bottom, on this coffee table, I have a taller item that's like crisscrossed from this other tall one, and then a shorter one from there, and that helps really balance that out more too. The middle one, if I have a TV, I have this long mantle, I have the fireplace here, and then I have that accessory next to the fireplace that helps balance that out because it's smaller, so it matches a little more with the TV. By having that, the right-hand side one is showing different furniture and how you can kind of balance that with accessories too. So I have like a chaise lounge here, and then I have a sofa here. But then I have a little bit more accessory-wise. I have like a blanket. I have a piece of artwork over here. So I'm trying to balance that out. Okay, so those are both your types of balance. You can see it here cut in half. It's the same. This one's cut in half, and they're visually fairly equal, but not the same. Okay, next one. And if I'm going fast, pause me and rewind me. But emphasis is the next part. It's basically having a piece in the room that really stands out. And focal point is used the same. I use focal point a lot when I look at when I'm talking about emphasis. They're really fairly similar. But must design to highlight natural or structural focal points. Or you can create ones for interest. And these pictures I'm showing you, I'm showing you this is a good way to highlight. This one not so good on the right hand side. So the one on the left hand side, this is showing a fireplace and making sure I don't have stuff that's getting all in the way. I can still really see it while it's all lit, which is even better. We have to create a focal point, and they're creating like a secondary focal point here, which you gotta be careful about because you don't want to be competing too much. But they're doing like a shelf with artwork kind of propped up, but the way they're highlighting it also, you can kind of see the light shining in that direction too. And you can do that without it. You can just make a wall of art and light it up, and that can be your focal point, especially if it's bold. The one on the right hand side towards the bottom, that one's an example of poor placement, of doing the focal point, like putting chairs in the right in front of the fireplace with in between it, I've had is not doing that. I should have the chairs pushed out, and then not have that piece here. And that would be designing the focal point much better. Okay. Harmony is our last one. In order to have harmony, you need two things. You need variety and unity in order to have a harmonious design. Variety as interest. It's when different styles, materials are combined. But if you do too much, it can kind of look confusing and all over the place. You want something to kind of rest on. So having unity is when the design are related. So it can be achieved by having same elements of design in the room also, or it can have a design style helps as well, which we'll look into later. If everything was just unity, it would look boring. So like in this picture in the room, I have, if this room was all white, it would be completely boring and not interesting, especially because there's not many differences in texture. But adding the pops of the red adds interest, that's adding variety, but it's not just the pops of red. It's also the patterns that are in there, like the patterns in the pillow on here, the very cool pattern on the wall. Adding that depth makes it really even more varied and interesting. It also has to do with different forms or shapes. So like I have squares on here. I have adding this chair that has rounded edges adds a lot more interest than if I just had another square chair. So looking at those pieces. To me, I like this space. I would give the variety a little bit more. To me, what's missing even more is a nice rug in this space. So adding like a rug that's like maybe really fuzzy or maybe rough if you just don't care about how it feels, but adding that variety of texture, of actual texture, like the tactile texture, I think would be really helpful. Okay, looking at harmony a little bit more is this room, I think, is a great example of it. In particular, you notice the chairs around the dining table. Those are they're exactly the same chairs. They have the same face, they have the same shape. However, some of them are white and some of them are clear. And that to me is a great example of showing the unity and variety the same. So I'm unifying by keeping the same shape and material of the legs and all of that, but I'm adding variety by changing the base of it. Like what I sit on is a different color. And you can do the opposite. Like some places get different shapes of chairs, especially like antique ones. They'll get different shapes and styles of chairs, but then like paint them all the same color. And that's the unifying piece of it. This also shows variety with the pillows and the colors there, the rug adding different texture. Also shows some harmony with a lot of that like stainless look that's kind of throughout. It's in the legs, it's on here. So that's adding some like unity and having it sprinkled kind of throughout. Alright, and then normally I'd ask you which one does not have good harmony. The answer for this one is this first one, this number 1 right here. That's because it's almost all the same color and it's all smooth. Like there's no difference in texture. If you want to do like all white and cream and beige rooms, you can do it and design it well. This is not an example of a design well room. You need that like different textures added in if you're doing that. This one right here is good. You can see the texture on the walls different, the texture in the rug, the visual texture on the floor. The one on the lower left, that one has like the contrast, which is nice, how dark and light, and then also the bumpiness of the fireplace, that stone, and the texture of the rug, and then we also have little pops of yellow color in there. The one on the right is a great example of most of the variation on here is the color. You're adding variety by color with those really pops of green and blue. Also, I'm adding in, like this looks like acrylic or glass, even on the here. But then I'm looking over here, I'm unifying it. I'm adding variety by doing it, but I'm also unifying it a little bit by like the glass or acrylic base on that lamp too, on the right hand side. I'm unifying by adding plants throughout. So all those different pieces. in your notes, there's this right here. I'm not going to go over it, but it adds a bunch more examples if you're just like, oh, I want to learn more about it, because it is hard to kind of do and learn about. So that's there for you. Okay, so making sure you get the notes from that, and then you have your assignment. So, and then what I'd like you to just find a picture, Google it, and remember, if you Google search it, I could find good proportion in a room, and it might not be right. You have to be able to explain it, and then for proportion, you should be finding an object, not an entire room. So maybe you could put good proportion for a lamp and see what comes up. Find a picture, and then you describe how it is in there. And remember, when in the description, you need to describe the ratio. And you can do that as like 2 to 1, 3 to 4, or if you want to give me percentages of like, okay, the shade is this percentage, and the base is this percentage, or the shade is this percentage compared to the whole entire lamp. Whatever works for you is fine, as long as you're getting something like that down. Scale. Reminder, scale is relationship of the objects to each other, not within itself, but the objects to each other, the room as a whole, or to people. Kids' furniture was best for that, because it's easy to find. So symmetrical balance, remember it's cut in half, and it's equal on the same on either side. Asymmetrical balance, if the room's cut in half, it's not identical. It's different, but it's still balanced well. Okay, so just kind of make sure you're finding a picture and putting it on there. And then harmony, this one you can find one picture that has both if you need to describe both in your description. Alright, I think that is it. So let me know